What is up, guys? It's your boy Thick Caucus, and today, speaking of thick, Bungie just dropped an absolutely massive article detailing all of the buffs and the nerfs coming for abilities within the Final Shape expansion. And so, guys, get comfortable, grab a snack, grab a drink, because this is a huge one. And so, let's get started. First of all, they have changes to stasis subclasses. And right off the bat, we have a big one. They're introducing a new stasis keyword, Frost Armor. So they say it's a stacking buff that reduces incoming damage, with greater damage reduction as your stacks increase. At launch, Frost Armor will be granted from a variety of sources, including the Tectonic, Grim, Glacial, Harvest Aspects, Fragments, and Exotic Armor. So they say by default, you can build to a maximum number of 5 stacks of Frost Armor that last 9 seconds. But with the newly reworked Whisper of Rime fragment, Frost Armor's maximum lifetime increases to 13 seconds and can build to a maximum of 8 stacks. Unlike the Stasis Shard Overshield, Frost Armor remains active when your super is cast, though its effectiveness is significantly lower while your super is active. So, specifically, the new Frost Armor keyword says you are fortified by layers of durable stasis matter, reducing incoming damage. Frost Armor damage resistance grows stronger as you gain additional stacks. Reduces damage from PvE combatants by 4.5% per stack and from enemy players by 2% per stack. So remember, with 5 stacks total, that's going to lead to a 22.5% damage reduction in PvE and then a 10% damage reduction in PvP. But you can increase that with the Whisper of Rime fragment, as Bungie said. And specifically for Whisper of Rime, they say no longer grants a stasis overshield when collecting a stasis shard, now increases the maximum duration and stack count for your Frost Armor. So a huge increase to the survivability when playing stasis. That's a big deal. Now, moving on from there, we have some big changes to the aspects that create stasis shards. So, for all harvest aspects, they added new behavior. While Grim, Tectonic, or Glacial Harvest is equipped, stasis shards grant a small amount of health and a stack of Frost Armor. And large stasis shards from Grim Harvest grant more health and Frost Armor stacks. Additionally, all harvest aspects now have a standardized cooldown when a large number of shards are created very quickly. And then for Tectonic Harvest, it now creates a stasis shard when shattering a frozen target in addition to shattering stasis crystals. So, stasis shards just got a lot more valuable if you have those aspects equipped. Moving on from there, some more changes involving Frost Armor. For Renewal Grasps, that exotic, they replaced the generic damage resistance with Frost Armor. So on entering your Dustfield Grenade volume, you or your allies gain a stack of Frost Armor. About every 0.9 seconds while in the volume, an additional Frost Armor stack is granted, resetting your timer. And also with the Baladros Wraith Reavers, they said replaced the Stasis Shard Overshield with a Frost Armor when you activate your Rift or use your Winter's Wrath Shatter attack. So that's actually kind of a big deal. Like every time you use your Rift, right, your class ability, you're getting that damage resistance, you're getting Frost Armor. Could be pretty decent. Next up, Bungie says because they've made all these changes to shards, they're actually making a brand new fragment to let players make shards a lot easier. Whisper of Chill. As you can see right here, Stasis Weapon Final Blows have a chance to create a Stasis Shard. Very easy, and that's going to enable a lot of like shard-based builds moving forward. Next on the docket, for Whisper of Chains, it no longer grants passive damage resistance when near a stasis crystal or frozen target. It now grants a chance to create a stasis shard when defeating a target while you have 1 or more stacks of Frost Armor. Next up, for Whisper of Fractures, it no longer increases melee energy regeneration while surrounded by enemies. It now grants a stack of Frost Armor when you shatter any frozen target with a melee attack. And then they say our final fragment rework is for Whisper of Torment. So now grenade energy gains are no longer dependent on your current health value. Base grenade energy regeneration amount per incoming damage event increased from 5% to 7%. While you have Frost Armor, energy per damage event increases from 7% to 12%. And then they say, finally, we've created one more brand new stasis fragment. So Whisper of Reversal says, while you have Frost Armor, dealing or receiving physical melee, i.e. not projectile melee, damage slows your victim or attacker. Next up, they have some changes to Shatter. So, increase the base PvE shatter damage from 200 to 400. That's crazy. Then they fixed an issue where bosses auto-shattering were being hit by 2 instances of shatter damage. So, kind of a nerf there, but kind of offset by the buff. Then they fixed an issue where players in an active super would show immune damage flyouts when automatically breaking out of stasis freeze. Okay, now on to more specific class-based changes. For the Warlock, specifically Ice Flare Bolts, they've increased the maximum number of Seekers created before going on cooldown from 5 to 7. Big buff there. Then for Hunter, for Winter's Shroud, they added a new behavior. So slowing targets briefly increases your class ability regeneration rate, and bonus is reduced in PvP game modes, but it now grants PvE damage reduction when active. Then for Touch of Winter here, guys, the Glacier Grenade added an additional stasis crystal to the ring formation, increasing the total count from 6 to 7. Glacier Grenade Ring now forms over 0.27 seconds rather than instantly, and then for Cold Snap Grenade, no longer chains an additional time when Touch of Winter is equipped. Instead, Seekers now duplicate when they freeze a target. Second and third Seeker chains now create a medium and large stasis crystal respectively, rather than every chain creating a small crystal. And then, guys, for Silence and Squall, increased Squall maximum travel speed by 10%. Squall Storm now slows down when any target is within its area of effect to reduce instances where it could overshoot its target, and then increase the damage and slow tick rate versus PvE combatants by about 40%. Wow, bringing its freeze time from approximately 0.8 seconds to 0.5 seconds. Next up, for the Titan, there's actually quite a few changes. So for Shiver Strike, they've increased damage versus PvE combatants by 10%. They've increased the size of melee target search area cone by about 50%. They've increased the maximum lunge tracking angular speed from 7 degrees per second to 21 degrees per second. And then for Glacial Quake, now automatically begins sprinting when the player throttles forward. Then for a Cryoclasm, removed the sprint time requirement. Cryoclasm now goes on cooldown for 4 seconds after one extended slide. Interesting. Then for Diamond Lance, bunch of changes here because I believe Diamond Lance is coming in for Prismatic Titans as well. So they've increased the thrown Diamond Lance detonation radius from 3.5 to 5 meters, increased Diamond Lance slam detonation radius from 6.75 meters to 8 meters versus PvE combatants. Diamond Lance now shatters stasis crystals on direct impact, reduced Diamond Lance pickup interaction time from 0.2 seconds to 0.1 seconds, matching Strand Tangles, and they've increased the Diamond Lance pickup interaction radius from 0.7 meters to 3 meters, matching Strand Tangles. So overall, I think Stasis is going to be a lot more effective in the final shape. But again, remember, because of Prismatic, you don't even have to be playing Stasis. You can get these effects on those Prismatic subclasses. Moving on from there, we have a whole section on Well of Radiance and Ward of Dawn. Oh boy, people are going to be absolutely fighting on Twitter because of this one. So, guys, overall, they say Well of Radiance's core fantasy has always been a supercharged healing empowered Rift combo offering a rally point for your fireteam during moments of focus. In its current form, its healing and damage resistance offer effective invulnerability, which removes any other defensive option from consideration, on top of providing a sizable boost to your fireteam's offensive output. So we've chosen to push Well of Radiance further towards that offensive capability by allowing its Radiance to persist for a short duration after players leave the well. We're also pulling back its defensive output, both damage resistance and heal rate, by a significant margin. So specifically, Well of Radiance now grants Radiant for 8 seconds when players exit the Well of Radiance area. And that is a long time and kind of a big deal. So especially in PvP, I mean, you can just put a well on a zone, get that Radiant bonus, leave, go completely around the corner, and still have Radiance. Next up, they've reduced the player's survivability while standing in the Well of Radiance aura. So they've reduced the healing per second from 100 down to 50 health points, matching restoration times 2. So they halved it. Then they've increased the heal on cast, though, from 40 to 300 health points. So on that initial cast, it's actually buffed significantly. Then they've reduced the damage resistance versus non-boss combatants from 40% down to 20%, and they've reduced the damage resistance versus boss combatants from 40% down to 10%. They do say, note, damage resistance versus enemy players is unchanged. And lastly, they've increased the maximum orbs of power from defeating targets while in your Well of Radiance aura from 4 to 5. So overall, guys, this is just going to be significantly less effective in especially boss DPS phases. You can no longer just put your well out in the open. Like, you could still get clapped by the boss. I think Well of Radiance will still have a part to play, except you're probably going to have to put it, just in front of cover or around a corner so that you can dip back behind when you're taking too much damage, heal up a bit, and then step back out, right? So definitely some factors to consider there. Moving on from there, Ward of Dawn is next. Now, they say Ward of Dawn, on the other hand, is meant to be a highly defensible safe haven for you and your team. In practice, our combat encounters don't have a lot of opportunities for this type of gameplay to shine. So we're making a change to allow Ward of Dawn to provide defensive capability while fighting around the dome, not just in it. We're also reworking Armor of Light to make your current health state while in the dome of Ward of Dawn more understandable. And we're pushing Ward of Dawn away from its current offensive capability unless you specifically build into it. So for Ward of Dawn, Armor of Light, removed Armor of Light Overshield. Ward of Dawn now immediately applies a full Void Overshield to the caster and allies that enter the dome. Armor of Light now instead grants additional damage resistance to players inside the Ward of Dawn, so 30% versus enemy players and 60% versus enemy combatants. Effective health of players inside of the Ward of Dawn remains roughly the same as it was before versus PvE combatants. Effective health of players inside the Ward of Dawn is significantly lower than it was before versus other players in PvP, and cannot be further increased by stacking Bastion barricades inside the Ward of Dawn to gain an additional overshield layer. And then, allies near the Ward of Dawn dome now have a Void Overshield trickled on over time, similar to the volume behind a Bastion barricade. No longer provides weapons of light by default. This behavior has been moved to the benefits of the Helm of Saint 14. The Ward of Dawn caster can now generate additional orbs of power by defeating enemies with melee attacks in or near their Ward of Dawn dome. So just massive changes there to the Ward of Dawn. Importantly, what this all means is that you kind of get the Helm of Saint 14 effect automatically, because you don't get a specific like Ward of Dawn special overshield, you get a void overshield, which means you step outside of the bubble and I believe you're still gonna have that void overshield, right? Like you're gonna have way more defensive capabilities. You won't have those situations where you peek out of the Ward of Dawn bubble and you have 0 health and you just get bodied by one single shot, right? But you are completely losing Weapons of Light. You get 0 damage increase with Ward of Dawn unless you are actually using the Helm of Saint 14. And the fact that it now gives you an overshield for standing near it, honestly, Ward of Dawn like could really become a very good just defensive base super. If you have another way to get Radiant like a well, honestly, the new Ward of Dawn will combine pretty well with the new well. So running like one of each could become like the new meta. Moving on from there, guys, we have the changes to Arc subclasses. So for the Hunter, for Arc Staff, heavy palm strike attacks and heavy air slam blind enemies now. And for Disorienting Blow, they decreased the base cooldown time from 100 to 90 seconds. And then for Tempest Strike, they added additional damage resistance versus PvE combatants when activated, lingering for a short duration after the attack. Okay, nice. Then for the Warlock, for Lightning Surge, added additional damage resistance versus PvE combatants when activated, lingering for a short duration after the attack. So this seems like a common theme. When you're doing kind of the special arc melees, you're going to get like damage resistance. Then for Ball Lightning, increase the final arming shape size by 30%, fix an issue where the arming shape was offset upwards higher than the maximum damage range of the projectile's detonation. Then for Chain Lightning, they've increased the secondary chain projectiles base damage from 27 to 54, actually quite a big change. Then for the Titan, specifically for Thunderclap, we have that same exact note, like I said earlier, added additional damage resistance in PvE, lingers for a bit. Then they've increased the minimum damage versus PvE combatants by 20%, increased the maximum damage for PvE combatants by 33%, and increase the maximum damage versus enemy players by 14%. So definitely some Thunderclap buffs. Moving on from there for Knockout. So they've increased the bonus damage granted to powered melee attacks versus PvE combatants from 25 to 50%. Then they've reworked the healing behavior. So it no longer unstuns health regeneration on melee defeats. Now it instantly grants a chunk of healing that scales with the type of target defeated. So a player gives you 30 health points, a minor combatant 50, a major combatant 75, and a champion plus combatant. So if you kill a mini boss, it's 100 health points. So overall, like Knockout getting a little bit of a buff, it seems. Next up, for Touch of Thunder, specifically Storm Grenade. Increased tracking speed when targeting PvE combatants by between 0.5 and 1 meters per second, increasing with the storm's lifetime. And then for the Touch of Thunder, specifically for the Lightning Grenade, it now applies Jolt after the first damage event rather than prior. Okay, moving on from there for Arc Grenades specifically. So, Storm Grenade. They've increased damage versus PvE combatants by 20%. Touch of Thunder variance damage is unchanged, however. For Skip Grenade, increased damage versus PvE combatants by 15%, and same with the Arc Bolt Grenade. Then the changes to Arc Fragments. So for Spark of Recharge, ability regeneration bonus now persists until the player returns to full shields, rather than deactivating as soon as shields begin to recharge. Interesting. Then for Spark of Beacons, now also triggers on defeating targets with arc power ammo weapons while amplified. Okay, cool. And then for Spark of Frequency, it now also grants 15 weapon stability on powered melee hit, in addition to the reload benefit. Okay guys, moving on from there, we have solar subclasses. So for the Hunter, specifically for Lightweight Knife, now has 2 melee charges by default, okay, increased throw animation speed by 33%, reduced suppression time between throws, so knives can be thrown very quickly back to back. Note, the additional melee charge does not stack with Ophidia Spade, unfortunately. Due to the exotic's unique energy recharge behavior, we'll be monitoring this and evaluating how things are playing once things go live. And then also for Knock 'em Down, they've reduced the internal cooldown on throwing knife refund from 1 second to 0.2 seconds. And next up, we are getting a nerf to Golden Gun Orb generation. So for Golden Gun Marksman specifically, they've reduced the strength of Orbs of Power created on precision hit as follows. When hitting non-boss enemies, reduce the strength from 0.75 times to 0.5 times a normal Super Orb of Power. When hitting boss enemies, reduces strength from 0.75 times to about 0.4 times of a normal Super Orb of Power. And then when hitting boss enemies while Star Eater Scales is equipped, reduce the strength all the way down to 0.35 times a normal Orb of Power. Then we have the Titan, specifically for Consecration. Consecration's slam attack can now shatter stasis crystals. Ignitions generated by Consecration now deal 20% additional damage to PvE combatants. Wow. Fix an issue where Consecration's slam attack was sometimes unable to damage floating combatants when they were grounded. Fix an issue where Consecration's intended PvE damage resistance was not being applied. So again, Consecration is coming for the Prismatic Titan. Next up, for Hammer of Soul. So, Bungie says this is also on Prismatic Titan. They've increased the projectile submunition count when Soul Invictus is not equipped as follows. If the projectile detonates within the first 0.7 seconds of its lifetime, it now creates 4 shrapnel submunitions up from 3. If the projectile detonates after the first 0.7 seconds, it now creates 6 shrapnel up from 5. Note, when Soul Invictus is equipped, only 3 shrapnel submunitions are created regardless of flight time. Shrapnel submunitions now deal additional damage when Soul Invictus is not equipped, and the damage increases after the first 0.7 seconds of the projectile's lifetime. Then, lastly, for Solar, we have Swarm Grenades. They've increased the tracking shape size from 4 meters to 6 meters. They've increased the linger duration from 7 to 8 seconds to 10 to 11 seconds, and they've increased damage versus PvE combatants by 20%. Moving on from there, we have Void subclasses. So, for the Hunter, specifically with Snare Bomb, they've increased the linger duration of smoke after detonation from 3 to 5 seconds, and it now applies small damage over time to enemies in the smoke, which increases in strength the longer they remain in the smoke. Then for Trapper's Ambush, increase the linger duration of the smoke after detonation from 4.5 seconds to 6 seconds. It now applies the Snare Bomb's damage over time to enemies caught in the smoke, and they fix an issue where Trapper's Ambush smoke effects could be obstructed by ground geometry. Then for Stylish Executioner's weaken effect can now be applied by glaive melee attacks. That is kind of a big deal there. Next up, we have the Titan. So for Shield Throw, they've increased the maximum bounce count from 4 to 5. They've increased the maximum lifetime from 3 seconds to 4 seconds, and now increases its tracking shape size and strength after each bounce, increasing its ability to consistently find a new target. Slightly increase the gravity and decrease the thrust speed with each bounce, and they've increased damage versus PvE targets by 20%. Maybe people start using Shield Throw now. Next up, for Offensive Bulwark, it can now only extend the Void Overshield's timer to its normal maximum duration to prevent an issue where players could get into a bad timer state. And it now regenerates a small portion of your active Void Overshield with each melee defeat. Then for the Warlock, First of all, for Chaos Accelerant, specifically the Charged Magnetic Grenade, they've increased the maximum intensity of physics knockback impulse by 10%, they've increased the damage versus PvE combatants by 20%, and now passively decreases your magnetic grenade's cooldown by 10% when Chaos Accelerant is equipped. I guess because no one was using anything other than Vortex Grenade. Next up, guys, for Pocket Singularity, increase the detonation damage versus PvE combatants by about 50%. Jeez. And then for Nova Bomb, for Cataclysm, they've increased the Seeker count from 4 to 6, and they fixed an issue where Seekers could impact the environment on creation. So kind of a big buff to Nova Bomb, specifically Cataclysm. And also, the Vortex variant, they've increased the Vortex Linger duration from 7 seconds to 10 seconds, and they fixed an issue where the Linger visual effects were shutting off early. So again, like, Nova Bombs are just getting better. Moving on from there, guys, for Strand subclasses, we're almost done here. For Thread of Warding, they've reduced the Woven Mail duration on Orb of Power pickup from 10 seconds all the way down to 5 seconds, so significant nerf there. Then, entering into the classes, we have Hunter for Ensnaring Slam. Detonation volume versus enemy players is now a cylinder with a 6.5 meter radius rather than a sphere with an 8 meter radius. This results in fewer instances of victims correctly attempting to counterplay by jumping but being caught by the ensnaring slam detonation high up in the air. Then for Threaded Spike, they've reduced damage versus enemy players from 79 down to 70, and catching your Threaded Spike no longer breaks invisibility. Then for the Warlock, for Weaver's Call, they've added a new behavior. Defeating a target with strand damage now has a chance to generate a perched threadling with a higher chance of generation from defeating more powerful targets. And this damage can be from any source, including other threadlings. Interesting. Then for Grapple, Tangles, and Melee. Okay, here we go. So, for Grapple, Tangles, no longer fully refreshes a duration when grappled to, and now increases their duration by a maximum of 5 seconds per grapple, reducing to a maximum of 1 second added after 5 consecutive grapples to the same grapple tangle. Now, they also say, additionally, grapple melee will no longer be able to be used after firing your weapon. This is primarily intended to reduce the number of difficult to understand grapple melee deaths in the Crucible, where players can grapple towards you, fire a single hand cannon shot, and then follow up with a grapple melee for a very fast cleanup. But this also reduces the number of melee damage stacking sources, so definitely a huge nerf to, like, the Titan just in bonkers melee damage utilizing grapple tangles. But then we have more changes specifically for the Strand Titan. So for Into the Fray, they've reduced the melee energy regeneration scalar from 4 times to 3 times in PvE activities and unchanged in PvP activities. And then for Banner of War, so they've reduced the maximum timer from 30 seconds to 24 seconds. Melee, Glaive melee, and super damage bonus now have diminishing returns with Syntheseps as follows. So, melee bonuses decreased from 1.4 times to 1.15 times. Glaive melee bonuses decreased from 1.25 times to 1.125 times, and super bonuses decreased from 1.4 times to 1.2 times. And then also, melee and glaive melee damage bonuses now have diminishing returns with Worm God Caress 2. So, melee damage bonus decreased from 1.4 times to 1.1 times based on stack count, and glaive melee bonuses decreased from 1.4 times to 1.05 times based on stack count. So, definitely some nerfs to Banner of War. However, it's still going to be extremely good just for the healing. Not so much for the melee shenanigans, but now just to still keep you alive, it's going to be fantastic. You just need to get that initial like melee or finisher, then you're off to the races. Then, finally, for Frenzied Blade, they've reduced the forward offset for melee lunge target point from 0.4 meters to 0.18 meters. And so guys, whew, there you have it. Some absolutely massive changes. Every single energy type being affected. You know, well nerf, bubble nerf, those are going to have massive changes to the meta. The introduction of frost armor could really be a big deal, and we're going to have to wait and see how all these changes play out in the final shape, but definitely these changes are going to have to impact how you look at your loadouts going into the final shape. So if you're planning on using a Synthos Banner of War Strand Titan, well, you might have to reconsider. In any event, guys, again, that's it for the video. Hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Destiny 2 content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That is linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.